With great love and excitement, we are also pleased to have the opportunity to celebrate our Distinguished Ethnobiologist of 2022, Dr. Dana Lepofsky. And one thing that normally the Society does is present some sort of honorarium or token of recognition to the annual DEB. And this year, on behalf of Dana and in recognition of her work, which James is going to talk more about, but the Society was able to make a donation on her behalf to the Pacific Association of First Nations Women. And we thought that this would be an organization that we know that Dana cares greatly for. And as you can see, their vision at the Pacific Association of First Nations Women, they envision a matriarchal community where all Indigenous women in BC are safe and respected with a sense of belonging and connection to cultural traditions. And we just think that this is such a beautiful organization, and we're pleased to be able to make that donation to them on your behalf as we celebrate Dana and her work. James has some more to share about Dana.
Great, thank you. So my name is James Welch. I'm an anthropologist at the National School of Public Health at the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation at Ministry of Health in Brazil. And I just wanted to make a few comments before we start. I'll be very brief because time is short. But I just wanted to say it is a pleasure to introduce Dana. She has been such a bright light for me ever since I met her about a decade ago. And it's been such an honor to accompany her over these years as someone who demonstrates rare excellence academically in a relationship with students and research communities, and in the grace and kindness with which she treats everybody around her. Her charisma and talent are reflected in her nomination letter, which reads, her archaeology and ethnoarchaeology research in the Pacific Northwest has been not only extremely extensive and thorough, but also pathbreaking. She's been one of the scholars most responsible for a real paradigm shift in Northwest Coast studies, from seeing them as hunter-gatherers to seeing them as intensive resource managers. She's raised the importance of historical ecology and culturally valued plants for British Columbia Indigenous peoples, highlighting the work of Indigenous women. So that was in the nomination letter, and I thought that was really appropriate. It's amazing what she has been doing with the Society for so many years. In 1994, she won the Society's Barbara Lawrence Award for the best student paper. And she co-organized and hosted the annual conference in 2010 and 2018. She served as president-elect and then president of the Society of Ethnobiology from 2007 to 2011. As her recommendation letter states, she led the Society to growth and an increase in professional reputation and respect. And she was editor and co-editor of the Journal of Ethnobiology from 2013 until recently. And I just wanted to comment here that in my view of things, successful academic journals usually become successful in spurts when they have exceptional editors. And Dana was such a transformative and exceptional editor, leading the journal's amazing rise in visibility, frequency, and impact. So she also received the Society's Mentor Award in 2019. And while doing all of this, she had the time and energy to make people feel good about themselves, to understand the importance of ethnobiology, and to contribute to the sense of belonging that so many people feel in the Society of Ethnobiology. So Dana, thank you. And now let's hear from you.
Thank you. Dana, you can share your screen.
Okay.
I'll just say that we're still trying to get the live stream to YouTube working here.
Should I start those guys?
Give me 1 second, Dana. I just want to make sure we have you on the big screen.
With that.
Okay, Dana, we are ready.
Awesome. Well, how to start? I couldn't be more honored to accept this award from all of you, from my people, from my society, where I have found my intellectual home and my heart home after like decades of being involved with the society. I just owe so much to so many people. So I found it a bit daunting to, in a half hour or less, to kind of honor all the people and places that have been so important in my life. So what I'm going to do is tell you a little story about my life and about those people and places starting at the beginning and just going into the early part of my life and my career, recognizing that there are so many more people than I can mention today that have brought me to this place. I'm calling in from North Vancouver in the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And for those of you who know me, know that I spend a good chunk of my time out of the city on a small island of Hoyotai, also known as Lepofsky Island. And people who know me as well will know that community and place are really important to me. And so it's particularly important here that I acknowledge the traditional territories of the people whose land I'm living in. And really, that's one of the things I want to talk about today is honoring that connection to place. And again, those people and places who have taught me over the years. And I think there's kind of a few lessons that I've learned that seem to kind of keep coming up from the very beginning that are kind of recurring in my life from the get-go until today. And they are about the connection to heritage and place and community and how intertwined they are and how important I think they are for the planet going forward. Another recurring lesson that has been given to me by the people and places that I've got to experience is the ways in which colonialism have threatened those connections. And so an important life lesson for me is about kind of learning about my privilege and the privilege of archaeology and ethnobiology to counter in some small but maybe meaningful ways those threats that are imposed upon those connections to place and people and heritage. And really the huge privilege that we all have in being able to stand by our Indigenous colleagues and friends and offer support from our position of privilege and with huge admiration. So I'm going to start my story at the very beginning, in my place of birth in Norwalk, Connecticut. Now, I'm hoping that you guys who know me are really surprised that I'm from Connecticut, that you think that I'm a good Canadian, you didn't know that I had US roots, because I'm very proud Canadian now. I actually was born and raised in the Eastern US, as were my parents, that beautiful couple in the lower left there. And they are the kids to my 4 Jewish grandparents who immigrated from Eastern Europe to look for a better life and to escape some pretty heavy racism. So I want to honor these people first and foremost for teaching me about community and the connection to, again, heritage and community and sense of place. Even though they were newcomers to this region, they were really connected to each other and to this place. And this is actually a picture next to my grandpa of the, if you can see my cursor, one of the Jewish cemeteries in Norwalk, where I used to go with my grandma, and she used to know everybody in the cemetery. And that was just really profound for me growing up, like recognizing that kind of connection. And that community of Norwalk has guided me and uplifted me my entire life. And it was really there that community heritage was just woven into my fiber. The other lesson that Norwalk gave me was represented in this slide here by the street name that I grew up on, Pequot Drive. And many of you will know that the Pequot Native Americans are Indigenous peoples of Connecticut. And all I knew about the Pequot growing up was that there was a street name And I was told by my parents that the Pequot used to live where we lived. And I was constantly kind of looking for the Pequot. And I have to say that I didn't even realize till I was preparing this talk that, in fact, Indigenous names were all around in this kind of alienated way. Sasqua Hills, Sasqua, Saugatuck, they were all around me, but there was no Indigenous people in my life. So I did what every budding archaeologist would do, and I dug in my backyard looking for artifacts, or what we call belongings. I have to tell you, it was highly illegal and probably of questionable ethics. I never found anything, but I was constantly kind of yearning to understand kind of who were these people who lived before me in this place that I called home as well. So fast forward to the next kind of stage of my life, where I went off to University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And I went to Ann Arbor because I was looking for a place that brought together kind of issues of social justice and community. And that was something, again, that my family really instilled in me. So this is a picture of Ann Arbor. My dad took me out there because he went there, and it was just this glorious day, and I was hooked. And it was really a great place to really, as I said, get my teeth into a lot of kind of social justice issues. But it wasn't until my second year, and I was taking an intro anthropology class and a 500-person lecture, why anybody thought building 500-person lectures in the halls is a good thing to do. But I was in one. And Dr. Conrad Kotak, who was teaching that class, and this is his textbook that we're using, a much earlier version, I'm sure. And he was teaching kind of traditional four-field anthropology. And I remember really clearly when he touched on archaeology, and I literally was kind of stood up in my chair and thought, oh yeah, I remember this is something that I really want to do. And so I thank Dr. Kotak for that. But that encouraged me to march myself over to the Museum of Archaeology, which you see in the upper right-hand corner of the photo. And there I met three extraordinary people who just have shaped my life in so many ways. The first person here is Dr. Richard Ford, Dick Ford, who probably doesn't need much of an introduction to most of you. Dick was actually the first recipient of our Distinguished Ethnobiologist Award. I had the privilege of giving that to him. He organized conference. He was one of the founding members of our society. And Dick called himself an archaeologist, but he was the first person that I met that really understood the kind of breadth that could be encompassed in that term. From the very beginning in Dick's dissertation work, working with the Tewa, he saw no distinction between Indigenous knowledge of the past and the present. And his thesis, even though he called himself an archaeologist, was actually largely ethnobotanical, largely from working with the elders. And Dick, of course, has served on many land claims and land damage cases, and he actually involved me in one of them. I owe much to him, and he comes in and out through the story a lot. The second image is Dr. John Speth, who served on our society board, and he and I actually overlapped for a wee bit. He was, like Dick, a professor at the Museum of Archaeology at the time that I was just kind of hanging out and trying to get into the scene there. And from John, I learned about kind of thinking outside the box and realizing that if you kind of wanted to understand a problem about how people lived in the past, you could draw on diverse kinds of disciplines to do so. And really, this is, again, another kind of thing, a fundamental of ethnobiology. And that lovely man on the right, Michael Blake, he was a grad student at the time, and I owe much to Mike, as you'll hear. He kind of set me up in the Northwest about where to live and where I should go eat and shop, but also was fundamental in establishing the foundation for my collaborations in archaeology in the Northwest. So we'll come back to all these folks in a bit. And Mike, I should tell as well, is a member of the society. And if those of you who don't know his work, you should check out his book on maize. It's an award-winning ethnobiological book. So while at Michigan, I got to excavate like archaeologists want to do. And here's John at the excavation, and learned about kind of doing funnel analysis and all these kind of things. I couldn't resist putting this picture of myself in here because I think it's a hoot. Like, did you ever see glasses so big or shorts so short? And I'm wearing like, a peace earth or peace something sign. And yeah, it just tells you kind of me and my roots. I learned much in working in Roswell. If any of you know Roswell, it is indeed a very odd place, but there's amazing research to be done there, including here at the bison kill sites. Not only did I learn archaeological technique from John and a whole range of things, it was the kicking off point for me to go to work the first time on the reserve of Zuni through this person here, Gil Stein, who is now a professor of Near Eastern Studies at the University of Chicago. Gil was taking a break between his master's and his PhD work and wanted, he applied for a job or answered a job ad in Zuni for the Zuni archaeology program. And so he was going out to see if he could get this job. And I said, hey, I'll go with you just for a road trip. Seemed like a good idea to me. I had every intention of going back to Ann Arbor, but I went to Zuni, and these two people, Barbara Mills and TJ Ferguson, offered me a job along with Gil, and here they are excavating with me at one of the sites that I ended up working on. I got to Zuni and my heart was, I don't know how to say this, but Zuni still has a big chunk of my heart. It transformed me instantly in many, many ways. It's a very spiritual landscape. It was an incredible opportunity to be living on the reserve for the first time 8 or 9 months. I got to go back a second time. Here, you can see me standing next to her elder, Amy Choyute, and she was part of the land damage case that Dick brought me into. But I just want to really kind of acknowledge both TJ and Barb as settler archaeologists, but really my Zuni teachers here, you can see my crew, for teaching me really for the first time what it meant to do archaeology alongside and in service of the Indigenous people whose history it is. And I didn't really get that until I lived on Zuni, and people would, where we dug, how we dug, the decisions we made were all decided on by chief and council. We were really, really working in collaboration with and actually working for the Zuni tribe. And so that had a huge impact in my life going forward. And so I owe a lot to the people of Zuni and to TJ and Barb, who also devoted their career to working with Indigenous people in archaeology. The other thing that Zuni gave me was, again, getting glimpses at the deep connection to place and community that we've talked about as a theme. But it was my first real experience with the effects of colonialism and the dark side of living on the reserve. And I saw firsthand the grief that comes with kind of colonialism trying to erode away that connection of people and place and community. Unfortunately, it's not the last time I've learned that lesson, but it was the first, and it had a really profound effect on my life. And so again, I want to honor the Zuni people for sharing both the light side and the dark side of their lives. Ann Arbor was also a kicking off point for getting me to the Pacific Northwest and eventually to the University of British Columbia, which you see pictured here. And how this happened was, in fact, I'm going to honor my past boyfriend who came home one day while we were living in Ann Arbor with a backpack and a tent and said he wanted to go backpacking with me in the Pacific Northwest. Well, I didn't know the Pacific Northwest was, and I had never seen a backpacker or tent. At this point in my life, I never went outside at all unless I had to. I would never even walk around the block. That was way too much for me to deal with. So to go in a tent to this place called the Pacific Northwest, have level travel. So there I am getting ready for our first backpack trip. And of course, that just turned my life around and to understand what it means to be quiet and to wild and sacred places. But what's really important about this story is that I met on that first backpack trip my first switchbacks and the emotional and physical trauma that entails. And at the end of that 5-day backpack trip, I couldn't move. I was so sore. that we couldn't actually go on to hike right away. So we took a ferry from the US side of the Northwest into Victoria, where we went to the Provincial Museum. And I came across this sculpture here of Nuu-chah-nulth whalers. And here you see a Nuu-chah-nulth whaler connecting with probably a humpback whale. And something about this sculpture, it moved me so deeply, and I wanted to know everything I could about the connection of these people in this canoe and the connection between those people and those whales. It just seemed, and now I know, it was just this profound connection. So I marched back to Ann Arbor and I said to Dick Ford, I want to do my undergraduate honors thesis on Nuu-chah-nulth whaling. Dick, who knows everything but everything, said, no problem. I'm pretty sure that there's no way that you guys can get a copy of that thesis. So it's not online anywhere. And I'm very relieved about that. I didn't check, but just important to know that it was just a, kind of hugely instrumental, this sculpture. I don't even know if it's still in the museum anymore, but I returned to it in my mind a lot. So that took me to UBC, where I was all ready at this point to study traditional plant use and archaeobotany. And so I launched into UBC as a master's student. And I said, okay, I'm here to study archaeobotany and archaeology and the Northwest, and found out that there actually was no room in the discussion for archaeobotany, that paleoethnobotany was actually not on the radar of people at that time. And it was all about salmon and stone tools. And I was stunned because I had come from Zuni and come from working with Dick. And I just like, really? And I was really at a loss. So I did what I often did in my career, is I called Dick up and said, what do I do? And he said, well, you have to meet these two phenomenal women. And here they are, pictured in their younger selves, Dr. Nancy Turner in the lower left and Dr. Harriet Kuhnlein. It took me months to get the nerve to walk into Harriet's office and to go visit Nancy and Victoria. But these two women changed my life. So at this time, it was really neat to know that Nancy and Harriet were just kind of working together for the first time and getting to know each other. They were also among the earliest members of the Society of Ethnobiology. You guys know Nancy doesn't need much by way of introduction, but important to know that Nancy, of course, made her career learning from elders and teaching and sharing about the ethnobotany of this region and really in other places in the world. And she's an ethnobiologist extraordinaire, in that not only is Nancy intelligent, hugely intelligent, but I think one of the hallmarks for me that make Nancy such an amazing ethnobiologist is she's unbelievably respectful to all the beings around her. And so that means that she listens, and she listens deeply. And I think that's one of the reasons that her scholarship is so impactful. Nancy is also a recipient of the Distinguished Ethnobiologist Award, and of course, just a huge mentor. And I feel like I've spent my entire career running around behind Nancy. Harriet called herself a nutritionist, an ethnonutritionist. Again, she shouldn't need much by way of introduction to most of you guys. She was working at UBC at the time, and nutritionists, is a kind of potentially narrowly defined Western scientific field. But like Dick and Nancy and others, she saw it kind of just as the entry point for discussions about health more broadly, physical health, emotional health, just well-being. And so she started this extraordinarily groundbreaking project called the New Hulk Food and Nutrition Program in the reserve of Bella Coola. And Nancy was part of it, and they invited me to be part of it to do surveys of the abundance and availability of traditional plants. So remember, girl from Connecticut, all of a sudden I found myself in unbelievably beautiful Bella Coola doing plant surveys. Nancy and Harriet guided me along the way, and then left me in the hands of the community, like Dr. Margaret Sy Wallace, you see down below, and Felicity Walk is here, unbelievable plant experts. And here, Willie Hands in the back with this ball cap. They also set me up with this astounding crew of Aaron Hands, David Hunt, and Sarah Saunders, who were willing to go in the bush with me and try to figure out where traditional plants were. I learned so much by living in Bella Coola, and again, so much to Nancy and Harriet for bringing me there and starting me off in my career in BC, and also to the community for allowing me to be part of their lives. Check out this photo in the lower right. That's the first traditional plant food exhibit that I did with my team. You can see they were in construction paper and magic markers, but it was very well attended, and it was very, very cool. Yeah, very meaningful experience in Bella Coola. So I was pretty happy to actually live in the Northwest and keep doing kind of social action stuff and work with Indigenous peoples in the Northwest. But my mentor, Dick Ford, was giving a talk at University of Washington in Seattle. And this is a picture of it here in the upper left. And I went with my husband, Ken, to see Dick talk because I would follow him anywhere. And after his talk, he said to me, "So when are you going on for your PhD?" And I said, hadn't really thought about it, actually. And I don't know if it was literally or figuratively, but in my mind's eye, he took me by my hand and introduced me to this man here, Patrick Kirch, who was in the department. I don't think Pat calls himself an ethnobiologist, but he should. Pat is an extraordinary archaeologist. He was kind of raised, if you will, at the Bishop Museum in the early 70s as a teen and onwards, at the time when the Bishop Museum, kind of an old style science, had kind of ethnobotanists and Douglas Yen, for those of you who know ethnobotany of the region, and archaeologists and malacologists and geologists and just linguists, a whole range of scholars coming together, having coffee together every day at the museum. So out of that era was these unbelievably collaborative, cross-disciplinary projects. Indigenous peoples weren't at the table at the Bishop Museum, and I think that's changing, which is great. But these cross-disciplinary projects were really the hallmark of the science that was happening. And Pat was really very much part of that. And so Pat invited me to go to Eliwa, this 2-kilometer island in New Guinea, to do excavating, as you see here in the upper right, in the waterlogged deposits where we were finding plant remains and tree crop remains from this ancestral site, 3,500-year-old site, which was the first site where people have actually lived on this teeny island. So here we were collecting these plant remains with the people who are the direct ancestors of this first site. And then he left me there to live in the community for several months to actually ask the people living there how they used, cultivated, managed those plants in their home gardens. And that's what you see here. And I learned so much. I should tell you, my first publication in the Journal of Ethnobiology was from this work, Eating Eggs on Eliwa, with Sakai, who taught me about raising megapodes. Of course, I learned much from the community there. And again, I want to thank them for just, oh my gosh, lifting me up in the most incredible way. I probably would have died there without the community, just literally. And I also, again, saw the beauty of community, but again, the effects of colonialism. And when I got there, in fact, people were hungry because there was food restrictions on what they could eat. And it was just really striking to me that there was these vibrant people on whose, were digging this site that was their ancestries, how many generations before. And then you would have folks come in and tell them how they should be living their lives. So again, this theme of colonialism, but also connection to place and the power of connection to place and heritage, very much in Eliwa. I then went from University of Washington to Berkeley. I followed Pat to Berkeley and was looking for another place in the South Pacific and to work. And I had only a very few requirements. I wanted to work in a place where Indigenous people could be very much part of the project and where we could learn from each other, where I could study traditional plant use, and where there weren't going to be diseases that would kill me. Because New Guinea had their fair share. So I ended up in Poor Me in the Society Islands, where Pat and other mentors helped facilitate. And there's much that I could tell you about the learning and the caring of the Maui people of the Society Islands. These are just some pictures from my Tahitian family, my Maui family. And this is me down a pit. This pit's like 4 meters deep. The walls are slumping in. I would never let one of my students, I mean, could you imagine? Anyway, don't even want to talk about it. So I learned, like, again, the connection to place, heritage, the importance of that. And something that kind of really resonates me through the, has resonated for me through the years is when Paulette said to me, my Tahitian mama said to me the night before I left, she said, Dana, you're not going to be like all the other researchers and leave without giving back to the community, are you? And I said, no. But her words have haunted me all these years, because I think how best to give back. So this is my friend Jenny Kahn, who now works in French Polynesia, and she and I are in the middle of doing a digital atlas. We just got permission from the French government to do that. Hopefully it will be in Maui and French. So that's kind of, hopefully Paulette will think that's giving back in a big way. And that takes me to Vancouver, where I live now, where I'm very lucky to live now. And again, back to my friend Mike Blake, who, after I got the job at Simon Fraser University, where I am now, Mike invited me to be part of this fully engaged collaborative project with the Skalitz people. Mike, this is one of the first times that a First Nations group had actually invited archaeologists to work with them. And here they are digging a burial mound. And I remember at the time, many archaeologists were scandalized because the way that it was being done, or kind of that it was happening at all. But it was Mike's just beauty and the willingness and acceptance and guidance of the Skalitz community that was the foundation of this project. And Mike brought me out there and wined and dined me by giving me a picnic lunch out at the point at the Harrison River, and invited me into the project. And it was really many of the rituals around doing archaeology properly and respectfully and working with community and being directed by community in the Northwest were founded on the work that Mike laid out in this project. And so it's Mike's humility and love of life that made it all possible. And I'm very grateful to him and to the Skalitz people and to that very, very special place of Skalitz. So that's kind of it. I've made my home here. I've had so many people have guided me through the years since the Skalitz project, again, reinforcing those same lessons about the huge importance to all of us about honoring heritage and connection to place and community, and how we have to use our privilege as outsiders to uphold those connections and be allies in the very, very best way we can possible. Today, my work is a lot of it is kind of bringing those connections forward through various kinds of digital initiatives that are completely guided by, directed, initiated by the Indigenous communities that I work with. And again, my privilege is huge, and I'm humbled and honored to be in the place that I am at this time. There's so many other people and critters. I had to throw my dog in there that I could acknowledge at this moment, who again have brought me to this place, and I could have stories about each and every one of them. I just want to acknowledge my husband here in the corner, and my father-in-law and mother-in-law, my mother-in-law who would take the kids while I was in the field over the years. My dear friend Isabel, if you're listening, Isabel, I'm loving you. But to all of these people, just huge, huge gratitude. To my students, I just can't believe how much I've learned from you. You are the reason that I do so much, that I care so much. My gratitude is just huge and everlasting. And to all of you, to my society, to my people, to my friends, I can't thank you enough for the lessons, for, again, guiding me along the way, and for bringing me to this place. Thank you.